Hola, ¿qué tal? I'm Rob Martinez, State Historian of New Mexico, and this is New Mexico History in 10 minutes. Let's talk New Mexico history. One of the most fascinating and intense moments of New Mexico history is when we transition from being a territory of Mexico to becoming a territory of the United States of America. This was between 1846 to 1850. There was a war between the United States and Mexico. It started in 1846 when there was a dispute between Mexico and the U.S. as to what the boundary would be between Texas and northern Mexico. There was an area, the disputed territory between the Rio Nueces and the Rio Grande, that was a no man's land. And what happened was President Polk, he started a war by claiming that Mexico had gone into that territory and spilled American blood. That didn't happen. He had actually had American soldiers go into the territory to provoke the Mexicans into shooting, which they did, and they shot some Americans, and that was Polk's justification for starting a war with Mexico, which was really a land grab. He wanted land to extend the United States to California and to the West Coast. Well, this was a war that was very controversial. The founding fathers of the United States had warned their descendants not to get involved in foreign wars, international intrigue. But this is where the United States starts to wiggle out of some of those warnings. And what happens next is quite amazing because New Mexico is right in the crossfire, essentially, between the armies coming to California from the east and the Mexican area of California. So here's the deal. New Mexico was the most populated area of the northern Mexican territories. It had as many people as Texas and California combined, if you can imagine that. So when Stephen Kearny's Army of the West marches into New Mexico, it's quite a shock to the system. Let's be very clear about something. New Mexico was part of Mexico, and New Mexicans were fierce patriots of the Mexican nation. People like Padre Martinez and Manuel Armijo were defenders of Mexico. There's this idea that Manuel Armijo just handed New Mexico over to the United States and that there was no conflict, or that Padre Martinez of Taos was an advocate for the United States to take over New Mexico. There were actually resistance movements against the American invasion and occupation of New Mexico in 1846, because that's what it was. Places like Mora, Embudo, and Taos saw fierce resistance to the American invasion. Padre Martinez even wrote to the American leaders saying, you cannot be executing New Mexicans for being traitors, because that's what they were doing. They were rounding up New Mexicans and executing them, claiming they were traitors against the United States. Can you imagine that? They were patriots. That's what Padre Martinez wrote in his letter. They're patriots fighting for their country, Mexico, fighting for their land, for their families, for their nationhood. And he was a fierce defender of Mexico. Manuel Armijo was saddled with the reputation of being a coward who ran away when he saw Kearny's army. But the fact is, Mexico really had not been all that supportive, at least with military personnel. An army from Mexico was supposed to come up to New Mexico to defend New Mexico, and it didn't show up. So he was the scapegoat for New Mexico being lost to the United States. Now, Mora was a place where the Americans had tried to access Taos to quell the resistance up there. But the people of Mora fought, the men fought and killed the Americans that were coming through there. So about a week later, this was early 1847, the Americans sent more soldiers and just razed the town. They burned Mora to the ground. That's one of the reasons to this day, one of the many reasons that places like Mora or Tierra Maria, northern New Mexico, they've had certain suspicions about outsiders coming in, because usually what would happen was there'd be some violence. So this is part of our history that we need to be realistic about and think about. New Mexico was part of Mexico and then was essentially forced to be part of the United States, to become a territory. The Mexican people of New Mexico in the mid-1800s were not immigrants to the United States. We had been here for centuries speaking Spanish, and of course the Pueblo people, the Apache, Navajo, Hopi, these people had also been here for centuries already. We weren't immigrants to the United States. We have a different story. I love immigrant stories. I love the stories of Italians coming to the United States, Germans, British, Irish people coming and leaving behind a very tough and difficult life to start anew in the United States. Those are great stories. However, the people of places like Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, Colorado, California, we were not immigrants to the United States. The United States came to us and took us over. So we need to keep that in mind when we're studying New Mexico history and studying certain attitudes that New Mexicans had about Americans. Americans did bring innovation and democracy, but there were also things that were brought that were a burden on the Native American peoples of New Mexico and on the Hispanic people as well, the Mexican people of New Mexico. So this is part of what shapes this relationship between the United States and New Mexico. There's some ideas out there that the United States had liberated Texas and liberated New Mexico and liberated California from a tyrannical Mexican government. The northern territories were part of Mexico. What happened was Mexico opened up her borders to the United States because she needed more people in the north. There just wasn't that many people in northern Mexico in the early to mid 1800s. So Americans started to come in, seeing opportunity for land, for business opportunities with a new population. A lot of technological innovations were brought across the North American continent, across the Santa Fe Trail to New Mexico. And that changed how we lived here in very good ways. But what also happened was a lot of Americans started coming in and the Mexican government started getting nervous, so closed the borders. And Americans kept coming in illegally into places like Texas and New Mexico. And we have documents showing this concern and showing records, monitoring where there were Americans, what they were doing, legal things they were doing, and illegal things they were doing as well. Ultimately, the Americans took over Texas. We know what happens there in the 1830s. Texas secedes from Mexico. There's the battle at the Alamo, and ultimately the United States annexes Texas. Then there's a war, and then New Mexico and California also become part of the United States. It was a painful process. People like Abraham Lincoln and Ulysses S. Grant were against the U.S.-Mexican War. Lincoln challenged President Polk and said, "I dare you to show me exactly where American blood was spilled." He wanted to know where this blood was spilled that started this war. Ulysses S. Grant called it an immoral war, that it was a powerful nation taking on a less powerful nation for land. So this is the history of the US and Mexico, it was a difficult start. It's a difficult start, but throughout the decades and into the 20th century, there would be very friendly, although sometimes difficult relationship between Mexico and the US, because Mexico ultimately lost about half her territory to the United States. So keep this in mind when we're talking about immigration and people coming across the border here. They're coming to land that was once their country. And I know officially now it's the United States, and it's a difficult question, but it's a complicated relationship. It's a complicated relationship that we need to learn more about so that we can move forward into a healthier and brighter future. Thank you for listening. Talk soon. Adios. Goodbye.